Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of the ColLABorate series. We are on episode 2, Groundhog Day, when COVID just won't quit. Today's topic is really all about risk management and how we're able to mitigate these risks in this world we are now living in. So pre-pandemic, during the pandemic, post-pandemic, we are going to talk about all the things today. Now, the aim of our series is to really make sure that we share what we're learning. We want to share what we're planning, and we want to support others in the industry with some of the skills we're learning. We want to share our partners that we work with, some of the opportunities that we've seen within the industry. We want it to both be educational, engaging, and drive people to want to learn more about our services, but then also drive people to understand and know that we are here for them too. It's a creative space. No questions are off the table. For any of you who know us and are familiar with us, as you will see with the team that we have today, we're open to all questions and we are open to collaborating. That's the name of the series. Now, today's speakers, we have Anthony Vade, who is joining us from the Event Design Canvas. And then we also have Natasha Thom joining us from our team here at Event Specialists. Now, I will let both of them introduce themselves, but I want you to know that Natasha is one of the newest members to the Event Specialist team and is a phenomenal event producer. We sought her out, and she talks all things risk management. And we thought the perfect pair to that would be Anthony Vade. For those of you who don't know Anthony, he is phenomenal and brings all of the design questions to the forefront without hesitation, and he's unapologetic in his approach, which I truly appreciate. Now, Natasha, why don't you share a little bit about yourself?
Wonderful. Thank you for that introduction. That was lovely. So my name is Natasha. I am the newest event producer to the Event Specialist team. I've been in the events world for well over 10 years now. It feels like I'm still a rookie. I started in community, and now I have the privilege to geek out on tech and really figure out how we can curate amazing experiences, a lot of the times with wonderful pieces of technology. And fun fact about me is I have lovingly adorned the name Hedgehog because I have this tendency to shave my head and adorn a spiky afro 9 months of the year. You just happen to see me with a lot of it right now.
All right, welcome. And what about you, Anthony? Why don't you share a little bit about yourself?
I'm kind of taken aback now. I'm not sure how to deal with a hedgehog. I'm more like a cue ball, so I don't know. That doesn't really, yeah. Wow. Okay, hedgehog. Really thrown. But okay. Well, thank you for the introduction. I think you covered a lot of it. I am the North American director with the Event Design Collective. So we are a global design consultancy and training organization that champions, and it's on my coffee mug, so you can see it, champions the event canvas design methodology, allowing you to find more intention and purpose and align your team towards a common goal to create more impactful, more meaningful events. So I'm really excited to join you today. Many of you have been through workshops with me and Mahogany in the past, and you know I like to keep things interactive. So we're going to try and do that. We're going to experiment pretty hard today. We're going to bring some tools in to help you start to navigate some of these risks. And I'm going to lean very heavily on Natasha for that whole understanding risk side of things, because most people who know me may actually see me as a bit of a risk from time to time, because I do like to push boundaries. But yeah, really excited to explore this topic with you and look into Groundhog Day a little bit. Mahogany, I'm going to throw it back to you with a question. You're probably not expecting this. Why Groundhog Day?
Well, truth be told, I actually thought it was very funny that we're seeing things repeat itself over and over again. February happens to be Groundhog Day month, so we felt it was fitting. What really brought it to the forefront was, we're here based in, all of us are here or 2 of us are in the GTA, 3 in Canada. The rest of our team is in the US. But for us, it was one of those things that we kept seeing the exact same thing happen over and over again. And I say this in the nicest way possible. The Canadian in me will come out, but we don't have to do things just because. I mean, the pandemic hit and all of a sudden chaos ensued, and it was, I don't know how to do virtual events. We have to. And then the panic of, oh my goodness, do we have to convert this to a virtual event? And what are the steps? And then it's almost as though all of those questions came back in all over again. And it's like we forgot the fundamentals of why we're in events. It is not better or more convenient to be in person versus virtual. I mean, that's a whole other conversation to have, but that is where Groundhog Day came from. And we wanted to make sure that we were looking at our events moving forward in a new lens.
Love it. And I'm a massive fan of the Groundhog movie. Say what you will about predicting the changes of seasons via large furry rodents. But what I love in particular about the Groundhog movie, aside from Bill Murray being a genius, I love some of the concepts behind it, the stuff that they don't really reveal. And what drew me into the Groundhog theme for this and the Groundhog movie is the way that Bill Murray's character approaches his predicament. He looks at this never-ending single day as at first an impediment and something that's stressful and something that is not what he expected and distressing, really. He gets a bit unnerved by it. But slowly in the progression through the movie, he starts to actually apply a bit of design and a bit of prototyping to how he approaches the predicament. One of my friends in the industry and one of my trusted advisors, Werner Puckart, based in Poland, an amazing experienced designer. He kicks off a lot of his sessions with this statement that says he believes that a lot of the world's problems are just design challenges we haven't quite cracked yet. And I think he's right. And I think the way that Bill Murray approached Groundhog Day, and I always mention the Ned Ryerson, the insurance salesman he bumps into every morning. He keeps adapting and prototyping how he could possibly break this loop. And I think for event professionals, that's a powerful mindset to embrace, to recognize that, yes, it may feel like we're trapped in Groundhog Day a bit, but there is the potential to use that to your advantage if you adopt a bit of a design mindset to understand what is the real challenge you face at its core, what is the risk factors associated with that challenge, and what is, to that effect, what is the probability of that risk actually occurring? And then once you have a good understanding of what the risks are, what the probability of them happening is, how can we then design and prototype ways to move forward with those front of mind? So what we've done to help us attack this in this short period of time that we have together is we've created a mural, and many of you will know that I'm a big fan of the mural interface in terms of whiteboarding. But I brought a framework out of mural that's all about understanding risk and understanding, like I mentioned, what the impact of that risk would be versus the potential of it actually occurring. So we would love to have a little exercise that we go through, and I'm going to, as I said, lean on Natasha heavily here to bring her expertise into this conversation. And let's look at what risks existed in our world before the pandemic, what have we faced during the pandemic, and then maybe we could start to forecast out and go, what risks may be on the post-pandemic horizon that we need to address. So with that, I think, is that a reasonable setup? I'm obsessed with frameworks, but, I'm going to throw to Natasha for a second and sort of, can you give us a bit of insight into your side of this and your world of risk management and how you've used frameworks or the kinds of conversations that you go into when you're engaging with your customers?
I love that. First of all, I am by no means a Groundhog expert, so it's nice to be on stage with someone that knows a lot more about the movie than I do. Maybe that's just my age. Am I? But in terms of risk, I am by no means an expert. I will come to this saying that I want this to be a conversation. I want this to be collaborative and really experiential. But for me, evaluating risk is really, what does that probability look like? So we were joking before we went live, like a meteor could hit, but is that something you're going to plan for? Well, likely not, because hopefully a meteor doesn't hit or lightning doesn't strike. So how can we plan for things that are more probable? So ensuring like your staff and volunteers feel safe, versus the likelihood of those things? And how does that affect event design and how we can still keep things fresh and new in this crazy world that we live in?
I love that, and really, it's interesting. What I took from that as well is a lot of this starts with engaging in conversation around risk, and we need to be comfortable having sometimes difficult or awkward conversations to address some of these potential risks. It's in the human nature to avoid uncomfortable conversations because we don't want to make other people feel uncomfortable. We don't want to put pressure on them, but it's very important to have these kinds of conversations. And why I'm so geeked out on frameworks is because it can help to smooth over and guide teams through those conversations to make them a little bit less painful, make them a little bit less stress inducing, and most importantly, to really document things, get it down on paper. Because we can have a boardroom conversation forever and a day, but we need to be able to reference back to what was discovered during that. And we need to be able to share that discovery and that conversation with people outside of that group that's involved in that conversation in order to shift the direction of change forward. So I think should we jump straight into it? And in the interest of limiting maximizing our time, let's say, not limiting, I thought we would focus on those 3 areas, and we will map them on our matrix and apply about 10 minutes to each section. We warmly invite all of the viewers, whether you're viewing this live or whether you're watching this after the fact on a recording of this, please still contribute to this exercise. Jump into these risk walls in Mural and drop in some of the risks that you face and plot them on this matrix as well. Let me share my screen, and we're going to limit it. As I said, I want to focus on plotting the top 5 risks that we faced, and let's see, and I will ask, there we go, we'll bring it up. There we go. So let's start here. So this is our risk walls. So you'll see here, I've built out the way that we would normally approach this form of collaboration is we would get the team to list a long list of all the risks that they could face before they plot it on the matrix. And this is important to allow the team to offload a lot of those. Brainstorm is a ugly word in creative world. We try to avoid brainstorming, but the long list allows us to exhaust every potential risk that we could face. So we always encourage, anytime you're doing a group exercise that involves a lot of complexity, create a long list to get all of that information out, because that exercise is valuable. We don't have time to do that in this session. So instead, I'm going to lean on, and hopefully Mahogany can jump in from backstage and help to contribute to this as well. But I'm going to ask Natasha in particular to look at, okay, let's find the top 5 risk factors that most meeting and event professionals were dealing with pre-pandemic. So say 2019 and before. Natasha, is there anything in particular that immediately comes to mind for you that was a hot topic pre-pandemic?
For me, I think the most obvious risk, at least here in Canada, is weather. So how do we plan for indoor and outdoor contingencies and those rainstorms that happen very spontaneously? The other thing that I will encourage as people drop in their own ideas, suggestions, and their own risks that they've experienced as well, is think about the demographics that are attending your event, right? So is it an adult-only event? What type of risks would you see within that demographic? Maybe you have children or minors attending. Do you have any sort of extracurricular activities or offsite things that might be deemed more like dangerous? Have a think about that and see if that stirs anything up for you as well.
Awesome. So where would you think we would put bad weather? And maybe it's not the best way to approach what you said, but and please feel free to correct me. Where would that sit if we know that the horizontal axis is impact? So the impact that this risk will have on the event if it occurs versus the probability of it happening. Now we're going to assume we have an outdoor event to begin with. I think that's a given. That's going to raise our probability. But where do you think that that bad weather risk sits on this matrix?
So I think bad weather sits very high impact, right? Because it can change your entire event design and what you have planned. And it can also have a ripple effect on your budget and those other pieces as well.
Yeah. So shall we, and probability wise, where do you think, so if it's in this quadrant here, do you think it is highly probable, if you have an outdoor event, obviously, that there will be weather concerns? How do we weigh up? Obviously we do forecasting, but how do where do you see that sitting on this matrix?
So I like it right in the middle. I like to give it a 50-50 shot. My rule of thumb, I don't know if this is right in terms of industry best practice, is I try and forecast like 3 days in advance. I feel like that gives us a good milestone or benchmark to plan from, because then we have time to roll out those contingencies if we need to.
Amazing. So a question for you at this point, does the kind of outdoor event affect the probabilities as well? And the reason I ask that, I worked in concert touring and music festivals for years, and we know a big weather incident at a large staged outdoor event has resulted in deaths and stages falling down in the past as well. So how would one look at their event, their outdoor event, and what are some of the techniques that you use for identifying specific risk factors within that? So we say bad weather, but obviously bad weather affects different events in different ways. How would you approach that?
Oh, tricky question, Anthony. I think the example that we might know of also, I can't help it, like I mentioned this, is Firefest. So they were obviously a big outdoor festival, tons of infrastructure that they were bringing in, but they weren't prepared for it at all, right? So I think they had storms at one point. They didn't have capacity issues. They had capacity issues. They had not the right infrastructure in terms of like washrooms and portable toilets and all those things. So really trying to figure out what your program looks like. What do you have on deck that's sort of set in stone? And then figuring out how weather plays into that.
Awesome. Okay. So we also talked about the content view. You mentioned the difference between adult content and adult experiences, I guess, depending how deep you want to go with that, versus the being appropriate for children as well. Where would that sit on this matrix in terms of challenges pre-pandemic?
Good question. Truth be told, I don't do a ton of necessarily family events, so I might not be the best person to answer that. I don't know, MJ, if you have any experience. Anthony, I would pass it to you. I would love this to be sort of a collaborative conversation.
Yeah, for sure. So I used to put on weekly children's events for a museum in my hometown of Adelaide. So one of the challenges that we had around that was, one, getting the right performers in place that were appropriate for kids. So that was something that we put front and center. And the other thing that we needed to address is when things aren't happening around the performances. So when people arrive, when people during breaks and at the end, if we had background music playing, were we sure that music was child appropriate? It didn't have any curse words or any subject matter that may be questionable. So that was something that we had to look at. And we started those conversations really early with the organizers and with the entertainers to make sure that was front of mind. And I would say this is a really important risk. I love that you brought it up because it wasn't one I immediately thought of. But I think the probability, if you do effective design, put that forward, and you have the right conversations early like we did, I think the probability of this coming up is fairly low. But if it does, if you get it wrong and all of a sudden there is, a Super Bowl halftime show style with Eminem and Snoop Dogg talking about, their gin and juice and whatever other inappropriate language gets pushed out, then if that happens, then the risk impact is pretty high. You're going to get some angry parents. You're going to get some children that are going to remember that event forever, but maybe not for the right reasons. So I would say, and please argue with me, but I would say the impact is high, but the probability, if you do your pre-work, is fairly low. What do you think of that?
I would agree with that. And I think sort of like building on the point that we mentioned even before we started this framework is I think brainstorming, having these conversations right at the beginning, right? So diving into what is the risk, what is the purpose, what are the really like goals, objectives, and intentions of whatever event that you're planning, having those transparent conversations. And then throughout the planning process, you continue to reference this as a benchmark and a milestone to hit throughout the entire process, whether that's 3 months, 6 months, a year. I think it's a really good way to keep us on track and on target.
I love it. You're speaking my language as well, because it plays back to my point earlier. If we're not documenting what we do, if we don't get it down on paper, whether it's in this format that you see here, or whatever format it is, to have that on paper when you do bring other people into the conversations, you have a tool to help you express what the team's done already. Now, if you've just had the conversation and not documented and found a way to bring other people into that conversation, then it's going to be a pretty hard process, and there's a good chance that things will get missed along that way. And as we miss having the right kinds of conversations and the right touch points, our probability starts to go up that risk factor may actually happen. I've seen some other ones come in here. I see Mahogany's been busy in the background. She said some of the other risk factors that we had was declining attendance, fear of virtual cannibalizing the in-person event. I mean, we fought that one for years, and I think we all know the reality of that the opposite is true. And then speaker scheduling with flights being canceled and things like that. Natasha, do you want to pick one of these and tell me where you think it might live on our little matrix?
Sure. In terms of speaker scheduling, I think this is sort of an easy one that we can tackle. So much like we've talked about before, I think the earlier that we're planning for things, the better, right? So hopefully, as you're sourcing speakers, having those preliminary conversations, you're figuring out, okay, so do you have any hard scheduling conflicts? Do you have any other events? Are your speakers presenting at things maybe the day before, the day after? Do they have a hard in and out time? Well, that's going to affect their placement in the program, right? In terms of flight delays, I think pre-COVID was one thing. During COVID, a completely different story, because flights were getting canceled seemed like all the time. So my hope is if you have the conversation early, the risk and the impact of a scheduling conflict for speakers is way less. So it's sort of in that first quadrant on the lower end. But I'd be curious for you. I know pre-COVID you were traveling a lot, right? So is that where you would put it, or would you bump it up higher in the?
It's funny. I have a short story to share on this point as well. I think you're bang on. It's having that conversation and planning for that risk factor as well. Because I agree. I think the probability is pretty low if you do that pre-work. But then again, it happens. I've had multiple times that I've planned day of flights in and they've been canceled or delayed, and that's affected meetings. So now my kind of policy is, if I'm traveling to speak at an event or for consultancy, I try and get them to fly me in the night before at least, so that there is a bit of a buffer there. But that, as you said, that's changed a lot during the pandemic time. I'll give you a story from pre-pandemic, back I think it was 2018 or maybe even 2019. We had this exact scenario with one of our keynote speakers. He was supposed to be on stage in Vancouver, BC, speaking. It was a very famous podcaster. I won't give their name away for their privacy sake, but he couldn't travel for a couple of different reasons. And we found out the morning that he was supposed to be there. So it was really stressful for the team. Luckily for us, my team, the tech team, was highly digitally dexterous. So I went to them and said, how can we deal with this problem that we have? What we ended up doing was, and this is before we all became experts, we ended up Zooming the guy in. We set up a monitor on a chair at the front of the room. The CEO of the company sat in the other chair. We put a point of view camera in so that it felt like this keynote speaker was there in the chair with him. and the CEO could look over and see his head on the monitor. So it kind of felt to them like he was actually there on stage as well. And of course, we put it all on the screens in the room. And the CEO was just ecstatic afterwards that we put that extra little step to make sure that not only was the speaker catered for so that they could still deliver their content, but we also thought, how do we make sure that this experience, both for the speaker and for the other people on stage, feels immersive and feels like that there's still some form of intimacy and conversation and dialogue around it. Now, we hadn't planned for that, but that's not that hard to plan for now that everybody has Zoom accounts and every other platform on the planet. So maybe that's something that people can keep in mind, that although the probability is low here, to have a couple of extra bits of kit on site to be able to cater to that, and having your tech team ready for that low probability but still possible scenario is well worth it. Okay, we want to get 2 more out. Let's rapid fire a couple more. How do you feel about these 2, or do you have another one that you would like to add to this, Natasha?
I just would build on the point that you were just making is equipment, right? So we obviously recommend in terms of contingencies, like bring a bigger kit than you think you will need, because chances are 99% of the time you're going to need something. So what does that extra kit look like? Do you have a backup kit like ready in the wings, ready to go? What happens if your like big projector malfunctions 30 minutes prior to your keynote? What happens if your PA system conks out mid-concert? Like, what types of contingencies are you planning for? And what does that tech look like?
Amazing.
And I am no AV pro, so
I'm adding that. So tech failure, and having been in the tech world for a long time, it was really hard to plan for this because you don't know when it's going to happen. I mean, obviously, no AV company, no tech provider plans to put faulty equipment on your event. As much as it may feel like it from time to time, they don't want to fail either. So yeah, being able to have that contingency in place, I think I agree, is vital. And I think and please, I don't want to start an argument with everybody online, but I think there's some shared responsibility around that kit, about having that on site. So often I've had planners say, well, you should just provide it free of charge, and it must be on site. And I know a lot of AV companies do 50% off the backup gear, especially if it's hot or it's cold backups, and we won't get into the difference between the two now. But I think really that needs to be shared between the organization buying the AV and the AV provider to cover the costs of that equipment, and to be fair in that respect. Because if you know how much a projector costs, having one sitting in a box not getting used is still costing them a lot of money to have it there. So where would this tech failure sit on our matrix of probability?
Good question. So again, I would try and plan for it as early on in the process as we can, right? But I think tech failure is very last minute. So the impact is going to be high, and the probability, I don't know, process could be up for debate. But we've had events. I remember I was doing a massive conference. We were just about to open the doors for our networking reception, and all of our sound equipment on stage went dead. And how do you plan for that, right? I mean, we can't redo a 6-hour setup from a tech team when doors are supposed to open. So in that sense, high impact, but what we thought would have been low probability, because we never could have predicted that an entire system would fail.
I think, I mean, and building on that point, different events have different scales of complexity from a technology standpoint. So I'm gonna still put it in high probability, because I've been working with tech long enough to know that it lets you down. Even the experts and the best maintained gear from time to time has gremlins that we can't avoid. And I think, to your point, and we've been making it a lot here, but you want to hope for the best, but plan for the worst case scenario. So really having that conversation up front, because it is a big impact. If your screens go down, if your audio goes down, they can't see the content, they can't hear and engage with the speaker, then your event's in big trouble. Especially the amount of time it takes you to rectify that situation. So let's put it maybe up here. I think, and I think what many people watching this now will realize, that anything in this top quadrant that is high probability and high impact, you should probably be thinking about with your event. Okay, let's try and drop one more in here.
I saw a comment that Mahogany shared with us, so thank you to that person that chimed in there around power outages, both pre-COVID and during COVID, right? So I think power outages pre-COVID, maybe not as big a concern, at least in my books, right? During COVID, we can talk about that when we get to those bubbles. But Anthony, coming from a tech background, where would you put that on our risk wall?
And I've seen so many amazing things done in the past with bringing in backup generators for events where they were super cautious about this, because we have pushed hotel power to its limits. We put a lot of gear in ballrooms that shouldn't have so much gear. So I think it's actually a bit higher than you would expect. But I don't, like, the probability may occur. I still think it's maybe low to middle. But although, it goes down and the room blackouts and there's a bunch of risk in people movement in a blacked out space that sort of needs to be talked about. But I think the impact isn't so huge because the power generally comes back. Now, if you lose the whole day because you blow up the transformer for the building, probably, but that's not likely. Most of the power outages I've seen in 25 years of putting on events, most of the power outages have been rectified within 10 minutes of them being down. So I don't know. What do you think, Natasha? Is it something that is really massively impactful, or is it a short-term concern?
I would be in the same wavelength as you, short-term concern. And hopefully, if you're working with a venue, they have built an infrastructure to accommodate for those things, right? So it may not be something that's top of mind for your team, but again, something to have the conversation about, because you know that you need to set your partner up for success as well.
Yeah. And you could even prototype or design an experience for the event if that form of interruption happens. Like, imagine putting together your event plan and saying, what if we have a tech failure and or a power outage that we don't have access to any of the technology that's in the room? We don't have any of the gear working. How might we engage with this audience in an analog way? And it could be anything. It could be someone having their phone and a Bluetooth speaker with some music blaring and you do a dance off in the room. I don't know. But could you still make that experience, although it is disruptive and not what was expected? Could you have something in your back pocket to still activate that audience and still give them an experience, even in a moment that wasn't planned for on paper? And it doesn't cost you anything to create that moment. As I said, a Bluetooth speaker with getting the room to go around and do a conga line or something. I don't know, just hypothetical here, but still use that rather than that awkward downtime when 1 minute feels like 2 hours of blackout or the screen's not working or whatever that might be. So I there's room for there to make that still an impactful experience, I think. Okay, let's keep this train a-rolling because we don't have a lot of time left, about half an hour. This should be top of mind and really a little bit too close to home for us at the moment, but I still want to go through it anyway. We know the pandemic has been a complicated time for all of us in events on multiple levels, but I think we can still get a lot of value from mapping on this matrix the risks that we face. So Natasha, let's hit us up. We've got one there already. The cost of logistics and on-site COVID testing as being a challenge. What other challenges, if you can quickly give me another 4, or give me another 2, and we'll see if the audience can pipe in with a couple as well. What other 2 risk factors have you seen during the pandemic?
So I think I would lean on the one that we saw post or pre. Oh,
look at that!
This snazzy transition for us. I would lean on the one that we talked about pre-pandemic, right? Power outage. What happens when systems fail and your speaker's on stage presenting?
Do you think that's moved anywhere on that matrix?
100%.
Okay, tell me where it belongs.
I think many of our event professionals, hopefully you would agree with this. The struggle with pandemic was we don't necessarily have as much control as event planners and producers of what our speaker setup is, right? And it's not always possible due to budget, time, whatever those may be. to fly out gear or fly out a kit or mail that to someone, right? So I think from my experience, truth be told, we see a lot of tech failures happen in the virtual world. So the probability is quite high that something is going to happen. It may not be that their entire power shuts down for their session, but I would say probability is high, and the impact, if not planned for, is also high.
Yeah.
Anthony, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree. It's in the and I hear the frustration, and I've seen the frustration as well, because not everybody has, a massive studio at home with all the kit and all the gear where they can be a confident presenter. Many people are still working on laptops. Some of them, I know some people that are actually still working. I can't believe this, 2 years later, they're still working on ironing boards on the end of their bed. So they're not set up with the gear, and we know production standards and production quality outside of lighting, microphones, and all those things. It's a lot of investment for a lot of people to make, but it is vital, definitely. So I think it belongs in that top quadrant. And as you said, and as we've touched on, a lot of this stuff can be addressed ahead of time. And I think there's some room as well. If there's problems with people's videos, maybe we just do audio. I don't know. I'm not sure what the solution is, but there is certainly ways to explore this as a risk factor and mitigate any potential negative consequences for the participants in the event. Okay, let's get through another couple here. What else
Got some great suggestions happening in here. So the one that I have experienced firsthand, well, many of these I have, but the server outages with AWS and Google, my goodness gracious. Talk about a stressful time. And those, again, could be totally unplanned. There's obviously the maintenance time that happens with these servers, but those happen in the middle of the night most of the time.
Yeah.
We've done a big event where AWS has gone down for well over an hour. What do you do when you have concurrent programming happening, right? Yeah. We as producers and planners would potentially plan for 10 or 15 minutes as gaps and buffers between sessions, but do we have an hour that we can make up? I don't know.
Yeah.
So I would say very high impact, but hopefully a lower probability. Anthony, what are your thoughts on that piece?
Yeah, I agree, and it's so out of the control of everybody involved. And sure, we can call up AWS and Google and try and get some backup and support, but yeah, good luck with that. Because if you're calling them, so's everyone else. Someone made a comment that's just been fed through to us when I was talking about the Bluetooth speaker and stuff, a megaphone. And I've seen megaphones used at events with great impact, because it is disruptive and unexpected, and it actually has some pretty big impact. Megaphone doesn't help you too much when AWS goes down. Just saying. Okay, so that one's there. That one's low probability. It's probably not going to happen, but if it does, it's a pretty big impact. And I think there's probably some room to design a solution or design an experience like the tech failure and the power outage that can still create impact for that audience member. So that's not completely wasted time, or send them on an early lunch break. Okay, let's have a look here. Are there other ones that stand out to you immediately?
Oh, I think this one, maybe as cliche as it sounds, Zoom fatigue. We see this talked about all the time. Oh, did I lose Anthony there for a second? So in terms of Zoom fatigue, I think we experience this, I would say from a client side, it's a concern that's raised, I would say, for all the events I've been a part of. So again, Zoom fatigue, or maybe even platform fatigue, is high probability of that. But again, what types of experiences can we curate for folks so the impact is lower? And look, Mahogany, thank you for joining.
And this just shows us exactly what happens during, as we prepared during the pandemic for our power outages and all of the things. I mean, we're prepared for it. And as Anthony just lost his power, it's a great way for us to continue this conversation. I can also add to the screen so we can continue this.
Perfect.
All right.
Mahogany, I would throw to you though, in terms of event design and risk management, what are some of the things from the event specialist side that you've curated to combat Zoom fatigue or platform fatigue?
Absolutely. I'll have to say, for me, platform fatigue and Zoom fatigue, it all comes down to the content that has been designed. And one of the ways to mitigate the risk is to be sure that we are prepared for the format that we're delivering in. I feel like we say Zoom fatigue and platform fatigue because we're not sure what the problem is versus and what we've designed for. And I feel like a lot of the errors come in. I mean, if we go back to even the fundamentals of design, it comes back to, well, did you create bite-sized content? Who is your audience? What kind of content are you delivering for that audience? Is it right for that format? I mean, this event that we're streaming today, I mean, technically we're streaming a webinar to multiple platforms, but with that also shows that we're delivering long form content in 60 minutes and then being prepared to answer questions as it goes. But I feel like sometimes we get lost in what we feel like we should be producing, which leads to the struggles. And we have Anthony joining us from outside, so we will bring him back up.
How crazy is this? We just talk about losing power, and what happened? I lost power, and now I'm forced to stand outside on my deck because I can't get phone coverage inside. Amazing.
All right. So before we head to the next point, I know the next point is really, I'm going to just move us over. We're going to look a little bit to the future. So give me a second. And let us talk about these top 5 risk factors that we would see post-pandemic. And we can even, I know we had during the pandemic right until full of this year, but think of 2023, even think of this year moving on. What are some of the risk factors that we're seeing for moving forward and into the future? Natasha, do we want to start with you?
Sure. So for me, I think top of mind in terms of a lot of industry conversations right now is the shift from virtual to hybrid to in-person. What does that content delivery look like? And does that change based on the needs of the client? I would say yes. But how are we planning for those things? Mahogany, in your experience, where would you put that on this risk spectrum?
I would put that, let's see, let's play here. I would probability, I would say we're starting to really move up, that we're going from virtual to in-person. We are also seeing it as impactful. And I only say that from having conversations with clients recently, and that they're panicked on what kind of risk management plan are we putting in place for the future? Do we have to go back to in-person and then be prepared to go back to virtual? Should that change? What does this look like? So I am going to say we're going to move it up a little bit. And it definitely has impact because it'll impact budgets. It'll impact all of the above. So let us put it in the middle. Anthony.
No, I think you're bang on. I don't have much to add to that. I think it is a high probability, and it's certainly a high impact scenario. What else do you think's on the horizon that we don't see yet?
I want to say considerations too for residual, I'll call it residual impact. So numbers of attendees. Are people afraid to still attend events in person? What does that do for our numbers? Another risk factor we'd like to consider too is, were the numbers we've seen pre-pandemic? Will we go back to that? How do we budget? So is it pre-pandemic that we're going to use as our benchmark? Or is it during the pandemic that is going to be the benchmark? That is also a big question that we are starting to see.
Love it. I also had a thought. What about the risk of alienation of our audience? What
right.
if
That's a
we
great one.
shift to either virtual, in person, and we say, okay, well, we're not going to worry about hybrid. We're just going to do an in person. What is the chances that there are audience members, stakeholders, who that is a big impact and a negative consequence because they no longer have connection to that community, or they want you to bring back in the digital stuff you did because they've gotten so much out of it in the past, but you give up on it. What do you think of that?
I think that's a great one. And I will say that alienation of the audience. I personally, I mean, we've been beating this hybrid drum for years and feel like it should be there. Now that we can see what I was calling that hidden audience and the impact that that does have on revenue, we know it's a fight that will be continued to be had at the C-suite level and in different organizations based on, do we go hybrid? Do we not? Do we include virtual or do we not? So a lot of those things will come into play. But risk of alienation of the audience, where would we want to place that? In my opinion, it's a high one.
Yeah,
It's a high one.
Yeah, and once again, the probability may be low if you take that into account in your design principles.
That's right.
It might be, but if you're not taking it into account, then the probability just skyrockets, I think, at that point. Oh, my power's back on. Let's see if I can get on the other computer.
Amazing. Well, while Anthony transitions, I would also throw another one out there is cost. Not just from the budget side, but I think at the beginning of the pandemic, we offered so many free tickets, free live tickets, and then you had to pay to upgrade for that VIP all access pass. But what does that look like when you shift to in person, right? You're going to have those venue costs, catering costs, AV, all those typical things that you would expect from an in-person event. But maybe the attendee expectations are, but I want a free ticket. Why doesn't that exist? So what does the management of expectations look like?
Cost is definitely a big one. I mean, you and I can attest to this coming up and having had these conversations. One of the biggest cautionary tales, I guess, that I shared with clients over the pandemic and even very early on was to not completely switch your revenue model or your pricing model for the event because you believe that everyone is expecting something to be free. Free doesn't mean there are no costs associated with it. And unfortunately, when everyone lowered their rates during the pandemic, how are you going to justify raising those rates now after the pandemic? So it's really being mindful of how that can impact the design moving forward.
I like that one. And I would throw another one out there too, just as we talk about content so we've talked about content during the event, but what does content look like after? So I think with the rise of virtual, people expect there to be this evergreen content. The content's just going to be available for eternity, when maybe that's not necessarily the case, right? If you're creating those niche, small, intimate gatherings, do you want to share that content afterwards? I don't know.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, that to me was actually an opportunity pre-pandemic that was very underutilized, was the evergreen content and the ability to have long form content that stays online longer. It's revenue generating opportunities, it's brand awareness opportunities, it's all of those things. So it's really something that we find that interesting to see. And for anyone joining us too, don't hesitate to click on the link in all of the platforms to join the mural conversation. And then you can also be an anonymous animal as well on the mural board. So competing for audiences. Oh, that is definitely a great one. I feel like competing for audiences is one that was there pre, during, and will always be there. It is actually one of my favorite. I feel like it is a hidden opportunity that we don't look at. During the pandemic, I will say, to be honest, what we did see a lot of were what were deemed competing audiences then became collaborative audiences because it allowed the rise of the co-location of events when budgets were slashed and we weren't able to produce the same way for various companies. I mean, others saw the numbers flourish, but when that did change, what we did see is competing audiences being able to combine their efforts to move forward. But now, because there have been so many successes, we'll say, and so many different additions to the space, competing audiences is definitely something to consider.
And I would like to thank my official sponsor for this session, Toronto Hydro, the power company here, who just gave us a great example of what can actually happen when it comes to power outages. What are the chances?
We'll also say I would like to thank the power generator behind my desk. That has allowed us to stay up during a power outage. Anthony, anything to add on the competing audiences?
Yeah, I think it really harks back to the earlier points we've made a million times. So if you haven't picked it up already, understanding the audience is key. And they don't compete if you understand them and you cater them specifically. Yeah. Very cool.
Okay. Now let's talk about some of the actionable takeaways.
Yeah.
All the fun stuff.
So let's look at this. So I hope that a lot of the viewers have taken on board this idea of getting things down on paper and mapping these things out and starting these conversations early. I think I picked that up from Natasha with the first challenge that we addressed. That it can be awkward, it can be difficult to approach some of these risk factors. Oh my God. Yeah, thank you. LOL. Yeah, it's been great with power here. Let's try again. But yeah, if you don't start that conversation and navigate through that conversation, then the risks don't go away. Just because you don't talk about it and close your eyes doesn't mean that the risks won't occur. So that's kind of my thought. Get it into the conversation early and document it, get it on paper so that you can bring other people into the conversations around risks as well, and explore frameworks that can help you navigate those conversations.
I love that. And I think one thing I'll build on too is we've talked a lot about risks, and not always are they the sole responsibility on us as planners or producers, but how can we share that load of responsibility across all stakeholders? And who can we delegate those responsibilities to, right? So on the example of a power outage, if you're at a venue, hopefully the venue is going to have a generator of some kind that can kick in, right? So you don't necessarily have to manage the contingencies and the risk management for that piece.
Love it. And if you do have a UPS, uninterrupted power supply is what it's called, to make sure your computers don't turn off. The key is don't have so much gear plugged into that thing that it can't keep up.
I was going to say, says all of the techies on the call. I mean, we're also sometimes our worst enemies, but we love all of the things.
Can I give a shameful plug to people?
Please.
if they want to get some tools and resources to help them navigate these kinds of conversations and how to approach design in general through your event creative process? We late last year released a new book called Design to Change. And this book is all about these kinds of conversations and how you, as an event professional, as an event planner, a producer, whatever your role may be, the opportunities that exist for you to lead these kinds of conversations and start to look and explore frameworks that enable you to do that. Because I think there's great opportunities. Mahogany and I have riffed on this many, many times in this little group. There's a great opportunity in this post-pandemic world and in this pandemic world for event professionals to step up and show the capabilities that we have to lead human-centric design and to really understand stakeholders at their core. A lot of businesses are struggling with this right now in this time and have been for the last 2 years. We talk about the Great Resignation. As I said at the very opening, Werner Puckart's point, that's a design challenge waiting to be solved by teams. And as event professionals, we deal with human behavior. We bring people together, we engage with them, and we shift the direction of their behavior in positive ways through the events that they experience with us. So this is a great opportunity for us to start those conversations, to show our expertise, to raise our profile within businesses and communities, to have the world recognize that we are the leaders in this space. So I think that's really a great opportunity for us to step up and collaborate with each other. I think this has been a fun exercise because we have been collaborating around this topic. And I think it's just the start. We need to do more and more and more of that.
One thing I will say that we can see in the audience as well, I did drop a link in there for everyone to have a look at some of the materials that you can get from the Design Collective website. Also, Dan, you make a great point. The risk is really going back to our in-person bad habits that were broken before COVID. That deserves the applause, that deserves the comments, which is really the premise behind today's session. We are creatures of habit, yes, absolutely, but we can do better, and we can design better, and we can do more for our industry and for our clients and for ourselves.
And the crowd goes wild.
We appreciate you.
There you go. That does deserve a round of applause. There you go. Yeah.
Do we have any last comments before we wrap up today's session? Anything you want to throw in there, Natasha?
We've harped on this point a lot, but I will say the earlier that we can start these conversations, the better. So maybe make it a part of your kickoff call or your initial onboarding meeting, is trying to figure out again, like, what are those purpose, goals, and objectives that you have, and then building in risk management to that conversation early so that we can continue to use this model and this framework as a benchmark to always refer back to, regardless of whether your planning pipeline is 3, 6, 9 months long.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. What about you, Anthony? Anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, I would add one final simple point. Lean into the risk. It's tempting to lean away from it, but we believe that true innovation lives on the edges, and you have to be willing to step up to the edge and take a look. And then, of course, be willing to leap once you get to the edge towards that innovation. So don't be scared of risk. Yeah, it's difficult, it's uncomfortable, but the best things come when we push ourselves a little bit further towards our comfort zone or outside of our comfort zone. So I would say, yeah, risk is important. We need to have the conversations. 100% agree with that. But 2, don't be scared of risk. Lean in, because that's where you will find the gold dust.
I love that.
Oh, that was so well put. And on that note, I would like to thank everyone who tuned in for episode 2. We truly appreciate you, and we look forward to continuing to deliver this type of education and sharing our knowledge with everyone and inviting you into our lab so that you can collaborate with us. Happening next month on the series, we are super excited to say that we are leaning with the digital first mentality. So the next event is all about how do we actually put that into practice. It will be a little bit longer. We actually will be live on a virtual event platform where we will be able to join the conversations, have different breakout rooms, and also play around and see how we can make things work. I'm Mahogany Jones, founder of Event Specialists, and I thank you for tuning in. See you next time.
Thank you.